Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. This is your host, Robby Rowland. You are listening to the Robby Rowe Show podcast. Today, we're going to be talking about content creation and starting a brand. So a little bit different change of pace. I'm excited. I've recorded this on my road trip. Let's get into it.
May I have your attention, please?
Give me a heater.
Now listening to Clear the Mechanism.
The Robby Rowe Show.
The Robby Rowe Show.
I actually really enjoy talking about this stuff. Obviously, I enjoy talking about like baseball, pitching, and mechanics, and mental game, like all that stuff, right? Everyone knows that. But I think I'm like super passionate about this because it's me, right? Like my brand is me. It's my name. And I think that that's a very prideful thing for me. And it's been a freaking crazy ride. Just to give you a quick recap, I think it really started with just my ability to be in the spotlight and not care about opinions, right? Like I've always been able to walk to the beat of my own drum, which therefore I think helps in creating content, not really caring about what people think, right? And then I would say like my ability to seek attention. I used to deny that when I was younger, but now I don't. Like I like attention and I like creating things that create attention. I don't know if that made sense. But and then it started with the podcast. I would say in 2018 it evolved into more hands-on with my Instagram account, creating content there, more coaching from there, created the websites and so on and so forth. But yeah, it's kind of just been one evolving thing, right? And I think the reason why people are asking questions about it now is because there's such a space for it, right? Especially during a pandemic. So we'll dive into all of that today. I'll talk about like how I started it, what I see as like the most important qualities to maintain it, because I think that's something that's often lost sight of, is like the maintenance of it, right? Like you don't just create 2 pieces of really good content and then you're done. It's a consistent thing. It's just like pitching. It's just like performance in general. I also want to apologize because now that I'm recording this pre-roll, I'm noticing all these spikes when I talk about a letter that starts with P or a word that starts with P. I brought one microphone and I didn't bring the pop filter on it. So yeah. Sorry guys. Anyways, so that takes us into, I want to talk about some links that I'll include in the show notes that you guys should definitely check out. Episodes 1 through 3 on my vlog are now live. Episode 1 was my return, talking about my return to professional baseball and showcasing the outing and all that stuff. Episode 2 was the road trip out here. It's 48 minutes of just me. So if you don't watch that one, I don't hate you. But episode 3 is probably the best one in my opinion yet. It's taking you into start day, how I prepare from the day before, what goes into it, how I'm trying to balance and juggle my company and playing, showcase like my warm-up, my bullpen before the game, my outing. I'll do some commentary. All that stuff can be found therobbyrowshow.com/vlog, VLOG. Like I said, I'll include the link in the show notes. So whatever platform you're listening to it on, just go to the page in which you see the show notes. I'll also include a link to all of my content creation products, right? So I did create a page a while back that has everything that I have used, am using today. It showcases like what I use for my podcast, how I record my podcast, what mic do I use, what digital recorder do I use, what software do I use, how do I edit it, how do I record interviews, and then it even my content creation, right? So like my mechanical breakdowns, my voiceovers, all of that stuff is on one page. I'll include that link in the show notes as well. So that brings me to 2 different sponsors for today's episode, rightfully so. Blue light blockers. I'm going to try to pronounce the company's name, and I'll butcher it, and then everyone's going to laugh at me. But UMIZATO, UMIZATO. UMIZATO. I'm wearing their blue light blockers right now. So if you're a content creator, you know blue light blockers, life, right? So they hooked it up. They hooked it up with some blue light blockers that make me probably go from like a hard 4 to like, wait, who am I kidding? Definitely meant soft 4 to like a hard 5. And they can actually do a lot more good from a performance standpoint. If you have yet to discover or learn about blue light blocking glasses, like, I'd encourage you to do so. Like, it's pretty dang incredible, especially if you're a millennial listening to this and you are in a phone every single day and every single hour watching TikTok. They are going to give you guys a discount. Discount code Robby, ROBBY, at checkout. I'll include the link to their website in the show notes as well. Second sponsor is rightfully so, again, Core Chair. It's a chair that I use back home at the office. If you're a business person and you got to sit down for a long period of time, you already know that like the most important thing that you have to do is to get a good chair. And not just a comfortable chair that you're in just like lounging, like, oh man, it's so comfortable I can't get up. But no, like a chair that supports good posture, good breathing, all of that stuff. Core Chair 100% does that. I made a post about them a few months ago now, right? I think. And it did really well just because a lot of people, I think, are starting to realize the importance of that. They also are going to hook it up with a discount code for my listeners, code Robby, ROBBY. Check out. I'll include the link to their website in the show notes as well. So now that that's all over with, we're going to hop right into the podcast on content creation and starting a brand and maintaining a brand and all that good stuff. And just, again, this is how I go about it. This is how I started. Like, it's a constant, like, learning process, right? And the biggest piece of advice that I tell everyone is, like, you're never ready until you're ready. Everyone's kind of real hesitant to dive into things, but you really won't know till you know. Cool. Well, I love you guys. Thank you for the continued support in my endeavors. Ooh, I've wanted to use that word for a while. And I apologize for wasting 9 minutes of your life before getting into this podcast. But that's the price you pay for listening to me. Okay, let's dive into it. Here is my solo podcast on content creation and starting a brand. Talk to you guys after the show. It's a funny scene, just to give you a little painted picture here. I have a lavalier plugged into the Zoom H1N, which is just recording audio into a micro SD card, right? And I have this lavalier mic up in my car to the left by the window, and then up over into what's the flap called that comes down, and there's the mirror. If it's sunny in the front, you know, you put the flap down, and it's through that, and it's just dangling down right in front of my mouth because there's a ton of wind, external noise, essentially. So I had to turn down the volume, the input volume, like all the way down to 3, maybe 2. So I'm having to literally basically, I haven't slept in a long time, guys, so bear with me on this episode. Literally having to swallow this lavalier mic. Hopefully the audio comes out good. That's the tough part, and it's funny. It's a good segue into where I want to take this episode, which is a question that I get often, which is, wow, listen, bear with me, okay? This is hard to do. Trust me, I make mistakes. Which is like how I started the whole content creation, why I started content creation, the things that I've experienced, the things that I do, use, the progress, the evolution of it, just basically all of that stuff. It's funny, I never really thought that, I guess out of every single like question that I get, if I were to put a top 5, the whole content dynamic is definitely in the top 5. I should do a podcast on that list, like literally FAQs, even though I already have it. How do you throw hard? How do you command better? How do you throw a curveball? Yeah, so like I said, we're going to be talking about the start of content creation. This is going to be a separate thing from my business, quote unquote, because I feel like they are two different things. Even though the content creation helps with my business, I look at it as two different things. But we're going to give a recap here of the start of the podcast. If you've been listening to me for a while, you've been following me for a while, you probably have a good indication of the reasoning, because I love to talk, right? Love to talk and don't really care what people think about me. And I've been super fortunate enough to have experienced a lot of things in the game of baseball, starting at birth, right? Like, my dad was a big league catcher. I was born into that family, that lifestyle. That's freaking dope, right? Not a lot of people get that experience growing up, getting the kind of being adapted to the lifestyle of living out of a suitcase on the road, right? Segue into what I'm doing right now. My butt hurts so bad. I literally have been sitting for so long. I'm sick of it. I have 60 miles left. Okay. Content creation. All right. So the start was the podcast. Okay. And it kind of was just one of those things where I was in winter ball in Puerto Rico, 2018. So it was fresh 18 to January 2018. And the idea of starting the podcast for me got brought up in 2017 when I was in big league camp with St. Louis, and I forget who it was, but someone mentioned like my ability. It wasn't a compliment. That's the funny part. It wasn't like a compliment like, oh dude, you talk really well. Because I mean, look, I don't. I don't really talk that. Whoa. See? I don't talk that well. But the comment was along the lines of like, I have a lot to say. Not necessarily it was opinionated, but whatever the heck it was, that got me really intrigued with the idea. So then, me being just a naturally curious person, I dove in, like looked at it, was like, okay, like I like podcasts, I listen to podcasts. I honestly, like, that and YouTube, I would say, are the two things that I learn everything from. Not even kidding. There was a period in which I read books, but I didn't retain information that well from books. So podcasts and YouTube. I'm a visual learner as well. I will say, sidebar, look, I'm ADD, okay, just deal with it. Sidebar, I did find that I do really well with podcasts, and like, I haven't really dove into the audiobooks, right? As much as I would love to say that, because I feel like I would sound smart if I said that, I haven't. But what I found with myself is that while I'm doing physical activity, listening to content, right, information, I retain it a lot better. I don't know if there's any like scientific studies behind that, but that's helped for me. I remember, so I got released in 2017, and then I went to indie ball, and I remember the tail end of 2017 in the indie ball season, I would go to the gym, and I'd be there for probably like, I don't know, 90 minutes, but it was a session, and I retained a lot of that information. So that kind of propelled me into that 2018 with winter ball. I wouldn't say there's more downtime than the regular season, but you would get like an off day, once every 10 days. And especially with this season, it was different because it was right after the hurricane in Puerto Rico, and we played day games. So then after the day game was over, we had like all night, right? And I was like, well, let's really dive into it now. So that was a freaking beast in and of itself, along with anything that's new, right? I'm a nerd when it comes to this whole content stuff. Like, I don't know why. I just did it too, right before I hopped on here. Like, I just watched like a 30-minute YouTube video on how to record something differently, and I was like, wow, that's awesome. Like, I just want to be equipped with so many different ways to do a task. It's very similar to pitching. So poetic of me. So I found that the most easiest, I don't think I needed to say the most out of that. I found the easiest way originally is actually very similar to how I record now still, was just using GarageBand. So once I got the understanding of the recording process, which, to be completely honest, was fairly simple. I literally hooked in my Apple iPods? No. My Apple headphones to the computer and hit record on GarageBand, and that's how I did it. I didn't have any like music. I remember like my 4th episode, I put like a little jingle in there, and I felt so sick. But then the hardest part, to be honest with you, was trying to figure out like, okay, where do I host it? How do I host it? What does hosting it mean? Like, what is this? What is that? And then, okay, well, if I host it here, how then can I funnel it to like iTunes, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, iHeart, YouTube, like all of these different, like the content creation, dude, like it is a beast. Content wins. Just know that. So it was cool because when I was first getting introduced to it, I had some like super dope teammates in winter ball, and that's how I recorded, I think, my first 2 or 3 episodes. I didn't actually record and publish an episode until very late in the winter ball season, because it took me a while to like get comfortable with it. If you have been following me for a while, you understand, like, I'm very perfectionist and like OCD with anything that I create and anything that has my name attached to it. So the one thing that I didn't want to do, even though I essentially did it looking back at it, was like start publishing really, really bad pieces of content, right? But at the same time, I will say, for anyone that's looking to get into that avenue of life, like, you just start. It's funny that I say that, like doubling back on it and realizing how bad those first few episodes were. But then at the same time, when you're in it, there's going to be so many things that go through your head as far as reasons not to do this, right? And it's like jumping off the diving board, man. Like, once you just got to jump. You just got to trust it, you know? And then you just learn how to deal with it afterwards, I guess. But, yeah, so that was the start of it. Again, I'm just talking strictly like podcasts, and then we'll kind of dive into a little bit more stuff. But that was the start of the podcast. And then I came home from winter ball, and then it was about learning how to then record an interview call and then publish that. So that was a whole nother beast to learn too. It's very interesting because there's so many different ways to do it, and everyone has a different way of going about it that they perceive as quote unquote the easiest way, or maybe not even the easiest, but like the most efficient way, right? And so I explored multiple different options on how to do that, and I came to the conclusion that using a certain software that recorded Skype and FaceTime calls was the best for me. It was best because it was easy. Now, again, sidebar, that's why I have had recent periods of my life where I haven't done a lot of podcasts, because if I have someone on, right, so like an interview, those podcasts, so to publish that episode takes me a whole workday, 6 to 8 hours. It's a lot of work, man. But yeah, so if you're curious as far as everything that I use, that I have used in the past, I have a full web page, like all of it. I'm pretty sure I've listed like updates too, where I was at, where I'm at now. So Now, moving on a little bit in the podcast realm, the big thing about that is, what mic do I use, right? Like, what sounds the best? Because it's true that the better you sound, it's like you're watching a video, right? It's very similar to the graphics of a video. If it's appeasing and appealing, then you're more susceptible to stick around. You're more prone to stick around and absorb that content, right? So, like I mentioned before, starting with the Apple headphones or earphones, wired, whatever's the one thing that I need right this second. It was very decent, right? But it wasn't podcast version decent. Because here's the thing, this is the battle that I faced early, and I still face it, right? Like, I'll be honest, I'm not the best. I'm not even close to where I think I could be with my podcast. But what happens is you get guys that consume podcasts, they consume that content. More oftentimes than not, it's like the Joe Rogan comparison, right? Joe Rogan uses a Shure microphone it's the best on the market. He also uses a mixer, an audio mixer, and it's like way over my head. Just let's put it simple. So again, what happens is people absorb that podcast, that content, so then expectation is now of that magnitude. So their ears get used to a specific sound, or their eyes get used to a specific visual, and then when they don't meet those standards, it's a turnoff essentially. So that was a tough thing that I faced, because again, I recorded without really even thinking with that aspect, because there were so many other components there. I just was like, oh man, let's get this thing going, let's talk, which is fine. Again, I think you do need to start somewhere. So then the game changed for me when I went from the trial and error period. Man, my trial and error period with microphones has been very, very funny. I went from the Apple headphones or earphones to then a headset, right? A couple different headsets, and it was like my third headset, I think, that trial and error. Thankfully, like, shout out to Amazon, because they do the returns. They've saved me a lot of money on those returns. But there was this one headset that I used for 4 seasons, because my thing was, I'm very fidgety, very ADD, I move around a lot. I'm very, what's the word called when animated, right? Very animated. So it's hard, or at least it was hard, when I was talking into a mic, because my audio levels would go up and then go down. That's something that, starting out with the podcast, that's not even something that you realize, right? Or you even take notice of when you're talking. You get into this conversation mode or interview mode, and you just go, and you're so focused on what you're saying that you're not focused on like where those sound waves are going, essentially. And that was a big struggle, because right after the Apple ones, I got like 2 USB condenser microphones, right? And I couldn't even publish a dang episode, because when I would like go to edit it, it just sounded like butt, as far as this sound right here. So guys, like, like high, low, and that was not something that I was about. So when I went to the headset, it was a game changer, because not only did it sound really good, that I actually still use often, but it was easy because it was on my head, and the microphone part of it was right in front of my mouth. Now, the tough part with the headsets, the microphone on the headsets, is that it really exacerbates the like those types of sounds. When you're saying like popcorn or podcast, it'll, I don't know, they'll give that really big sound. But that was the least of my problems, right? Okay, so then it's funny too, because now that I'm thinking about the evolution of my podcast, like the system has been the same the whole time. The system hasn't really changed too much. I think just the gear, the equipment. I guess the only thing drastically that changed from a systematic standpoint was I started doing video podcasts. I didn't realize that the software that I had allowed me to do video. It's tricky because, again, if you're going to dive into this stuff, you got to kind of understand where your where your Wi-Fi capabilities are, because if you don't have good Wi-Fi, like oof, you're setting yourself up for failure. So that was a grind for me, because I would want to do videos all the time. I'd want to do like, this and that. You got to be really cautious about the Wi-Fi cutting in and out, because as soon as it cuts out, you know that you're going to have like so much more freaking editing work, because you got to go back into GarageBand and blah, blah, blah. I guess that I haven't really talked about that either. So when I record an interview, so I record it on the software, it's called Ecamm. So I'll take that, it'll spit out usually a waveform. And then I just take that and I just drag and drop right into GarageBand. And then I can do a pre-roll, I can do sponsors, I can do mid-credit stuff, like all of that. Which, again, it's the same system that I've been using the whole entire time. It's just my gear's gotten better. I went from the headset to then getting more experience and being able to control my animations. You know what actually helped with my controlling of my animation was actually recording video on the podcast. So I was watching the screen because it was him, it was the guest, and that kind of forced me to stay more in that same posture that I needed to be in to capture better sound. So there's a little tip for you. So I went from the headset to the Yeti, the Blue Yeti. I have that right next to me right now. It's the go-to. Everyone loves the Blue Yeti, and there's no reason not to love the Blue Yeti. It's freaking dope. Then just recently I went from Blue Yeti to Rode, not Rode Procaster, but Rode like NT something. There wasn't really a specific reason. I was completely satisfied. I am completely satisfied. To give you more context, I'm driving out to Lexington for a couple months to play, and I didn't even bring the Rode. I just brought the Yeti, because the Rode is hooked up to a boom stand in my office back home in California, and I was lazy and I didn't want to take that out. So it was nice though, because again, I just my gear and my equipment just continuously upgraded over time. So then once I got the boom, it was really nice, because then I could kind of move it around, stand up, sit down, all that stuff. Trying to think what else as far as equipment goes. Nothing really comes to mind. I'm I'm constantly like, I find that the trial and error periods is so fun to me. I guess it's just a learning thing, right? Like learning new input. I could easily have had that system of the way that I went about recording, the way that I edited, the way that I, recorded the interviews, all of that stuff, all the way back from a year ago. I could have just stuck with that, but I was like, well, I want to see if this mic's better. I want to see that. I don't know if it's just my voice or what, but I'm consistently seeking out that podcast voice. And since you're listening to this podcast, you know exactly what I'm talking about, because that podcast voice is so dope. And all those guys, I think Tim Ferriss does as well. He uses that Shure Shure microphone, and he uses like a audio mixer and all that stuff. I don't know. I don't want to really dive into that. I always think about like learning about it and kind of researching it, but then at the same time, like now that I'm going back to play in my season, I just don't know. Not about it. My goal for this whole content stuff, and even most specifically my podcast, because it probably takes the longest to record and edit and stuff, my goal would be to hire a team, right? Like a media team, even though I'm super stubborn with my content. It's bad. I would like to have a system in play where I could just sit down, record with somebody, and then give instructions to whoever is my managing of content person and just be like, hey, there's the episode. I want that on YouTube. I want clips. I want 5-minute clips here. I want that. I want crop that video on YouTube and then crop that video in 9:16 ratio, throw it on TikTok, put that one on an Instagram story with a swipe up feature and that, and then have this one for a post. And like, that's what I would do, because as you can imagine, that stuff takes a lot of time. But like I said, I'm stubborn. It's probably my fault. There's been a lot of people that reached out and did some work for me, and I just couldn't do it because I have a specific feel for how I want my stuff. And it's not that they're bad, whatever. It is what it is. I think that wraps it up on the podcast. I really like the idea of being like actively playing and having my podcast, because I have this Zoom H1N right now. It's a handheld. This is how I would record like my in-person stuff. Let's see, what in-person podcasts have I done? All of them with, not all of them, but one with Dr. Heenan, Bearded in the Brains. And then the only other two was when I was in Colorado, and I did a 2-parter with DJ Edwards at Push Performance, and then Dylan Rowe at Push as well. We recorded a podcast in his car in the morning at like 6 a.m. It was great. And so that noise you just heard, that wasn't me intentionally going over the bumps. There's construction, so don't think like, oh, this guy's a terrible driver. Thank you. Okay, so that wraps it up on the podcast. Let's go into the video stuff. So the video stuff for me is amplified drastically when it comes to the trial and error, constantly seeking out new ways to do this, that, and whatever. It started with an idea of like, oh, how cool is it that I'm in season and we have iPhones? And at the time I was in indie ball. My manager is awesome, so like I would bring my phone out to the pen and just, for my own benefit, I would want to take some video and then that kind of evolved from taking the phone out to then bringing a camera out. The camera that I initially had wasn't good. I think it shot 720, like 30 frames per second. It wasn't good. It was a Canon. Actually, I don't know why I said it like that. Canon's not bad. I still have a Canon. And then it evolved to another camera, went to the Power Shot, don't remember exactly which one, and then more learning, okay, what looks the best for sports videoing? Okay, I need more frames per second. Okay, then I got that, and then it was like, well, that's only at 720, 60 frames per second. Okay, now I need 1080. All right, what gives it 1080? So I went from like the G7X to the G7X2 Canons. Then I went to the Sony A1000, and then I have a Sony still, but Sony for me is like freaking foreign. Then when right after I got surgery, I was like, I'm really diving into this content stuff. Like, I'm going to be recording myself every day. I'm going to like dive. I'm going to splurge, because before I was trying to be cheap. I was Craigslisting it, a Facebook Marketplace in it, and all that. And then I was like, I'm splurging, I'm going new. So I got a new Canon M50, which is the same camera that I have today. I love it. And then it's evolved from there, because the M series has its own set of lens, but then you can do adapters. And once I learned about adapters, then I learned about the Viltrox EF speed booster. And then I was like, wow, that's actually an adapter for the Canon EF lenses. So let's run through the lenses that I've had. So it started with the M series, which was M22, M50, M1122, M75 maybe? 75 to like 200. And then it was the adapter. Anyways, this stuff's not important. just know that it started with all the visual stuff for me, like how can I get the best picture. Then it transformed into like picture and audio, right? Like I learned about wireless transmitters and receivers and how dope that stuff turns out. Like that's my favorite content that I do, is when I just set up the camera and I put a mic on, and that's so fun. But then you go through that trial and error period as well, because you don't know. You're researching which one's the best, what does it mean, what's the thing, and then you're learning about the range that it has, and you're thinking about, okay, well, if I'm going to do long toss videos, I need to be at least 300, 400, can it get that? And then, so then you're going through a different, kind of another Amazon buy and then return process. What do I use now? Ceramonic Blink 500 is my favorite by far, because they're little clips. You could do it with a lavalier, or you can just have the clip, which is super dope. Dude, these things get pricey. Well, not sugarcoat it, but it's my business, right? So like, obviously you're gonna pay for quality of your business. But yeah, so then the point that I'm at now, I think I'm pretty good. I don't think I need to make any major upgrades. The last major upgrade, I spent about $700 on a new wireless transmitter and receiver, because the problem that I kept running into was the audio would cut out when I would do my lessons because of where like my body was positioned. And I was like, man, is that because the wireless audio that I'm using now was only $250? So maybe because we constantly think that, right, as humans, like, oh, the more expensive it is, the better. So then I was like, F it, like, here we go. I'm going this big old route, and the first time I used it, it was worse. Like, it was terrible, so I returned that quickly. But it's funny how everyone kind of has a different opinion on the matter. Everyone has their different system that they use and that they like and that it works, and kind of just stick with that. But again, it's very similar to baseball and pitching and training. Like, find stuff that works, constantly be tinkering, but don't overload it, and come up with a pretty good system. I did recently splurge. This is a whole nother dynamic that I learned deeper into the game, was like, it's not necessarily about the camera, but it's about the lens. So once I learned that, it was like, oh, that's cool. I can like get lens for different, field of views, or how close, how far, and that. And at first it was, I just went cheap, and content was what it was. And now recently, I think the last lens that I got, I use it all the time now. It's a 16 to 35. I use it with an adapter, and that was like upwards of $1,000. Right? It's crazy, but it's a good lens, I guess. I think in order to be equipped, I guess, to be good at like this content creation stuff, I'm not trying to brag and say I'm the best, but just from the people that I talk to that are kind of in that same realm, like, we're all very similar in our character traits and our personality traits, like OCD, perfectionist, that stuff like that. Another trait, I guess, that is extremely important, especially if you're gonna create your content and show it off to the world, is you gotta have thick skin, and you gotta not care what people are thinking or what they're perceiving you as or what they're saying. Like, a lot of hateful people, a lot of hateful stuff. And another piece to this is you gotta be resilient, persistent, consistent. Consistency is the name of the game. I literally wanted to start with the consistency topic, but I guess I'll just dive into it now. There's a lot of people that reach out to me and ask me like about this and not necessarily how I got started, but some tips. Content creation, right? More specifically like baseball player content. And every one of them I say, you got to be consistent, dude. Everyone can produce a fire piece of content on a Friday night. But are you going to do that Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday? Are you going to do it 3 times, 4 times a day? Are you going to do it on 1 platform, 2 platforms, 3 platforms? Right? Like, it's a beast, man. It is an absolute beast. And I think it's super easy to get burnt out because it's a lot of work. And the work that you're going to be putting in the beginning stages is going to take a long time because you just don't know yet. And then it gets really easier once you get a grasp and an understanding for it. But for me, I don't know if I would say it's like I get bored of the same thing, like the monotony of it, but it could be that. I think it's more of just wanting to learn new creative ways, right? So then that kind of takes me into the editing stuff. In the beginning, it was super simple with just like iMovie on my MacBook and, just simple. Cut, clip, paste, export. Sweet. And now I have Adobe Premiere Pro. I got that on my phone and my iPad now. And that's a beast. That is an absolute beast. I haven't even like reached the tip of the iceberg. If that's the phrase, I'm not quite sure, to be honest. It is a beast. Editing is a beast. I'm nowhere near how good people are. And quite honestly, I don't really care. I'll dabble like a little bit, but more specifically on overlays, when I'm doing like a pitch overlay of slow motion. Gosh, I didn't even talk about the slow motion stuff. That was a whole nother thing, because the Canon M50, it shoots slow-mo, but it's 720 slow-mo at 120 frames per second. So if you were to go to your iPhone, you see the new iPhones have 1080 at 240 frames per second, which is fantastic. But I wanted more. I wanted almost like that Edgertronic stuff. So researched the best camera to do that. Found it, Sony RX V2. So what is that? Roman numeral 7, like the newest one. Shoots 960 frames per second. Oof, it is a beast. So once I got that, then it was a whole nother system of like learning slow motion and time remapping and motion and all of that. Man, sitting here talking about it, I don't know if I've ever really realized how much I've kind of learned and done. That's kind of neat, huh? But yeah, takeaways. If you're listening to this podcast, in which I believe you're only listening to it because you're interested in getting into this content creation stuff yourself, not just, a Robby podcast, I'm going to listen to it because I like his voice. I don't know if there's anyone out there that does that. Especially when I haven't slept in 20 hours. I'm delirious. So, totally lost my train of thought, I'll admit it. I think another piece to all of this is the audience, although they do want to be wowed and like sucked in, right, with how it is visually appearing and how it is sounding, like all of those things that are like the wow factor of creativity, I guess, and creation. They also appreciate, and this is something that I've prided myself on since the very, very early stages, they appreciate authenticity. So be real, be a human being, be flawed, right? I think in the beginning, I was so focused on like, don't mess up, like make sure it's perfect, because look, you watch all the YouTube videos on, the reviews and the how-to-dos and all that stuff. Those guys are flawless, right? Like they're friggin' perfect. But then everyone loves a blooper reel, right? Because it's, he's a human being. Oh, humanity, got it. So, and then I kind of just let my personality shine. Not saying that I have a winning personality or anything, but just like, look, I'm not a college grad. I didn't go to college. I'm not a professional speaker. I'm not a keynote speaker. Like, I'm a guy that throws a ball and does a instruction. So I'm going to present myself as that. I'm going to mess up words. I'm going to use words that I don't know the meaning to. I'm going to try to sound smart, but actually sound dumb in the process. That's fine. That's fine. I think the more you do it, the more comfort comes from it. And just the more learning. And with learning comes growth, right? And growth is freaking fascinating. Growth is freaking awesome. Seek growth. The last thing that I'll hammer home is the battle. I've faced this so many freaking times due to my perfectionist OCD mentality. The battle of spending a lot of time on a piece of content or whatever, like a lot of time, right? I'm talking multiple hours, sometimes a whole day on one thing, and then it not performing well, whatever platform it is. That's very, very frustrating, and it takes a lot of life out of you. And I would just say with that, make sure that you're getting into it, this content creation animal, for the right reasons. Because just like baseball, it's a fudging grind, and you got to have a good foundation, right? Because we can watch a guy on any social media platform with a large following and maybe making a little bit of good money, and you're like, wow, that's amazing. He just creates content for a living? That sounds fun. I'll just do that. Guys, I'm not just saying that it's a beast because I do it and I want you to be impressed with me. That's not the reasoning. It's funny because, like, I'll have guys that I, like, used to play with, you know, and they would be like, oh, like, what are you doing for work now that you're not playing? And this was before, you know, dude, the road construction, man. It kind of sounds like a fart. And I would say, like, oh, like, I have, like, my company, I create content, and it was, like, comical. Is that the right word? Comical? For them. And I would get so frustrated. I still kind of get frustrated, to be honest with you, because I don't think people understand how much work goes into it and how hard it is. You know, like, and you want to be recognized for the work you put in. Anytime you put in a lot of work on stuff, you want to kind of be recognized, and it's always nice to get affirmations. But that stuff won't come, at least not on day one. Like, I get a lot of people that reach out now that love it, and that's what it kind of fuels the passion for it, right? Because those will come if you stay consistent to it, man, and you provide quality stuff. It'll work. A couple tips before I head off here, because I'm actually almost to my destination. The goal is, how can I provide value for my audience, right? That should be the goal. The goal isn't like, all right, how quickly can I make a quick buck? I said that wrong. How quick can I make a buck? Right? I think that's a lot of people's goal to start out, and those are the guys that fizzle out very quickly because they realize that with that method, they won't make that buck, and they will not do it quickly. So when you're establishing your goals, establish the right reasons, right? Like, if you have a good skill, which is a good understanding of a certain subject, dynamic, topic, I don't know, whatever, then share that, right? Because for me, that's what happened was, like, I love baseball. I'm so flippin' passionate about baseball that I want to share that passion with anyone who will listen, you know? And yeah, just provide value, and then good things will happen from that. Consistent value. Consistency and value. I think that's it. Maybe that's what I'll name this episode. The more that I talk, the more things that are coming up to my mind about, like, what I should say, because there's a whole lot of stuff, and this could honestly be like a 2-hour podcast talking about all this stuff. I didn't even dive into like the whole phone, like the iPhone stuff. I went through a whole period with the iPhone in and of itself. And then, wow, there's maybe a part 2 in the near future. We'll see how this episode does. I kind of assume that my general targeted audience, they want to hear baseball stuff. So I don't really expect this episode to do really, really well. But if I can help someone benefit, right? Because at the end of the day, I'm super passionate about this too. Because if you're an aspiring player and you want to play at the highest level, it's the conversation of, hey, how do I get seen? Dude, you have a free resume with your Instagram, Twitter, TikTok, YouTube, Facebook, LinkedIn. Like, those are all free resumes. And don't be ignorant and think that college recruiters, professional scouts, like, they're not looking at that stuff. You know? It's something to be taken advantage of. And it could be really simple. It could be really basic for you too. Just like every time you throw, set your iPhone up, take it out of your pocket, set it up, hit record, and then go back when you're done throwing and look at it and be like, oh, that was a good throw. Let's clip that and then write a caption. That's how it started for me. 2018. Yeah. I guess it was 2018 when I really got into like the instructional content. Was I would just film my throwing sessions and then would have a spark of an idea with a talking point, because there's so many things within the game of baseball, right? Like, there's so many teaching points, and I would have that kind of pop up into my brain, and I'd be like, oh, that'd be a good post. And then it kind of evolved from like 1 post a day to 2 to 3 to having to schedule posts to having to create content in advance, all of that stuff. But know that too, right? Like, it's your resume. It looks good if you're working not only at training and your craft, but also you're showing signs of being adaptable to learning things through content creation, and then knowledge and overall intelligence with how you present your captions. There's a lot to it. And it's fun. I really enjoy it, man. I don't think, if I didn't enjoy it, I definitely wouldn't still be doing it, you know? So here's the last thing. I promise this is the last thing. The joy that comes from paid advertisement, monetized content, very easy revenue, I guess would be the wordage. I don't know, as much as how cool that is, because I do work hard for it. The coolest part is when people reach out and say, dude, I've been following your content for X amount of years or months. You've helped me from this to that. Like, that's where it gets freaking awesome. And you'll know if you're in it for the right reasons when that day comes, when you get your first kind of dollar from it, and then B, when you get your first impact, right? Your first impact message from it. You'll know. All right, that's all I got. No, it's not. I have so much more, but I have a full page, like I mentioned before, on every product and equipment and editing software and all that stuff that I use. It's on my website under, I don't know what it's under. You just type in content creation in the search bar and it'll come up. It's everything there, and it'll have links to things that I use. I didn't even go into video editing software for my mechanical breakdowns, and I'm sure that's probably the one thing that a lot of people listen to this for. Oh, sorry guys. Okay, well, we'll catch you next time. This is your host, Robby Rowland, on the Robby Rowe Show podcast. You guys have a swell rest of your day, and God bless. Bye-bye now.